So I'm here with Antille.
What's going on?
We're going live, taking questions. Come on out. I know nobody can hear me right now, but
Come out wherever you are,
we're going
whoever you
live.
are.
So we got 6 people watching us right now. If you're just joining us, we're doing questions. I'm here with my friend Antille. We'll be taking any questions. Also, while we're waiting for questions, we're going to probably discuss some things, maybe what's going on in Syria. And so, Antille, maybe give people your kind of idea of how you see Syria and what's going on there.
Right. Well, yeah, I can tell that this is definitely, we'll definitely have a vibrant discussion about this. In my view, you have, lots of sovereign countries around the world, and you have a sovereign country in Syria, with a government that the West is interested in overthrowing effectively. And there are, you have a dictatorship in Syria, to be very clear, and you have segments of society in Syria that what I consider to be a minority in Syria that are against the government, as you have similar minorities in basically every country that are anti-government in one way or another. And I think that this specific segment of Syrian society is being specifically manipulated or specifically armed as a means to get rid of effectively an unfriendly government and create regime change in Syria. That's effectively how I look at it, at least.
So, out of all so we know that the Free Syrian Army is kind of used as we'll say, an umbrella term for
Right.
any group that is fighting against the government. What are some of the groups that might have, like we know some of the groups, like the Al Nusra Front, have aims like establishing a caliphate, an Islamic caliphate. Is there other groups like them that we are currently supporting?
Right. I think you're exactly right in saying that the FSA is an umbrella group, and I think in the beginning, in say 2011, early 2011 through 2011 into 2012, the actual genuine discontent that is in Syrian society against the government, that genuine discontent was, grassroots, had some grassroots support to a certain extent, and that was monopolized, and that was hijacked effectively by the more Islamist segments of society that we know to exist in Syria. I think if you want to talk about, in these instances, you can talk about social incubators and where there's actual grassroots support for political currents in countries. If you look at Syria in the early 1970s, when the current president's father was in power, Hafez al-Assad, there was a specifically Muslim Brotherhood uprising that took place in the city of Hama and areas like that, and it was a specifically Sunni jihadist movement that rose up in an attempt to overthrow the government, and it was put down, and a lot of people say quite harshly, and that created some discontent among the Sunni population of Syria to a certain extent. And I think that segment of society was seen by people outside of Syria who were interested in removing the Syrian government. They saw that segment of society as a potential segment of society that could be armed to overthrow the Syrian government. They would have overthrown the Syrian government if they had the necessary armaments and political support in the 70s. And so I think that the same sort of this same population is being exploited to a certain extent, again, to fulfill the aims of governments outside of Syria. That's definitely how I feel about that.
So anybody watching, does anybody have any questions that they they wanted to ask, maybe find out our position on something, have a discussion, maybe.
Yeah, any other opinions and stuff like that, it's always good to hear what everybody has to say, for sure.
So,
how many people we got now? 5 still?
yeah.
It's not bad.
So,
what do you think, man? What do you think about, the Syrian government and the opposition to it and stuff like that? What do you think about the Kurds in the north, for example?
I know that in the north it's a little bit different. That the stated goal of the group in the north, they are semi-autonomous at the moment, and
right.
I know that the stated goals are to create a secular, polyethnic society. I know that they're more aligned with the government
right.
than other groups. I know that there are groups within the opposition that aren't Islamist.
Yeah, no doubt.
I know that there are some secular groups as well, as well as Islamist, and it's just kind of a mess, I think.
I agree with I agree that there are definitely secular groups among, the FSA, as a banner organization is effectively a secular organization, and among that there are secular groups, but I think the majority of the real hardline fighters, the people that are actually taking ground from the government and holding it and then pressing on further, the people with the biggest manpower reserves, the people who receive the most funding from countries like Qatar or Saudi Arabia. People like Qatar and Saudi Arabia are not funding democratic movements. They're funding rather, groups that are in favor of Sharia law and this sort of thing. So I think, we're sort of playing a negative role in the West, as far as I'm concerned, in treating this opposition as if it's, obviously not everybody is uniform in the West even about what's going on, but at least our media outlets and a lot of our establishment, our political establishment, sort of blanket the FSA as definitely secularist Democrats, and that's obvious. As far as I'm concerned, that's not the case, and I think there's lots of evidence to suggest that.
All right, so I think we should move on. I think I think what we should discuss is what we were talking about the other day when we were saying about punishments. China right now is cracking down on religion. They're banning teaching religion in schools. They're coming down really hard, and I've heard before people say that people that teach their children creationism should be punished, put in jail, punished in some way for teaching their kids creation. And what do we feel constitutes abuse?
Right.
What should be the punishments for abusing kids in this way of teaching them?
Right. Well, I think that's like
why is it abuse? Why is it abuse to teach kids creationism or teach them to be religious?
Right. Well, I think that's like the real barometer is if
moral barometer.
Sure. If we decide that it is abusive, and I think I wouldn't say that there's a consensus around this, but I'd say, if you do, come to the conclusion that it's abusive to indoctrinate your children, I suppose, if you come to the conclusion that it's abuse, the only logical way to move forward with that is to carry out whatever punishment that you would regularly carry out for abuse. I think that it's sort of,
What's the level? What do we feel the level of abuse is, though, on something like this?
well, yeah, I think that that's really the main kind of crux of this discussion, and it's definitely a discussion that needs to be had. Is it abuse? What level of abuse do you consider it? I don't know. I can't necessarily say myself. I mean, I think that it's definitely reprehensible morally to teach a child of a young age, indoctrinate them, from a young age, that if you don't do X, Y, and Z, you're going to burn in hell. I think it's, if it's not, if you can't scientifically prove that, it's difficult, man. I don't know. What do you think?
Um, I think for me, the abuse comes in when you tell a kid something that you have no evidence for, first off.
Right.
Um, and that does measurable psychological damage to the kid.
Yeah.
You're telling a child that they're going to go to hell if they sin, or if somebody dies of another faith, or somebody dies that was an atheist, that they're going to hell, or that
Yeah.
kind of thing, that can really have an effect on somebody psychologically, and it's abuse in that way. The problem that we get into is where it comes to freedom of thought, freedom of expression,
Right.
right, and the supposed freedom in a parent to raise their child the way that they see fit. So if somebody, I think the basic thing for me is the freedom of speech and expression. So if somebody tells me that I can't say a certain thing, that because my opinion they don't agree with, I'm not allowed to say it, I don't want that to happen, so
Yeah.
I don't want to impose that on somebody else as well. So we have freedom of speech and thought.
It's
Freedom
true.
of thought, you're allowed to think however you want to think. Like if you,
I think an important thing to consider, though, is like, we have this discussion about people's freedom of expression and freedom to teach their kids what they want. We especially kind of use, how do you say, kid gloves when it comes to the major religions. I think we play with them with kid gloves. Whereas if we happen to stumble upon, some isolated backwater house, and it's a very specific cult, and it's a cult of individuals, and they indoctrinate their children, far away from society. I think that there might be instances where people like that have probably had their children taken away by child services and stuff like that. And I don't know. I think that when you really make it so that your children are unable to function outside of this cult circle and stuff like that, I think that is a high level of abuse. You know what I mean? Children should have the opportunity to learn, what everybody else is learning. They shouldn't be stifled just because of their parents. Obviously, you have a right to teach your kids everything that you want, what you want to teach them, but I think there has to be some limitations. I don't want to say limitations. It's difficult. You know what I'm saying? Definitely to come on and say, what you think parents should teach their kids and stuff like that. It's definitely a touchy subject, but there has to be, protection for children to a certain extent. You know what I mean? There are children who die because their parents think that it's acceptable to practice faith healing and stuff like this. And no, it's my religious right to
using maple syrup to cure meningitis and
things like this. I think there have to be protections and provisions for things like this. And like I said, I think that when it comes to major religions, we play with more with kid gloves, more with these major religions than we do with, say, an isolated group of cultists. And I think that that's something that definitely needs to be explored.
Yeah, that's a good point. What's another thing that we've been discussing? I'm just trying to.
Well, I think even to go further on that point, when we were talking about that yesterday, you also showed me that this is happening in China.
Yeah.
And it's also, but there was also a similar law passed in Iceland, if I'm correct. Was that not the article that you showed me?
Iceland just declared Christianity a public health risk. So
That's interesting.
They
Yeah.
have a warning against Christianity. They don't stop you from practicing Christianity, but they have a health warning, kind of like cigarettes, I guess.
Right.
I
And
wonder
do you remember
if
what the specifics of the law that were passed in China were? Because I know they at least said that
I
it's
know that the idea was that they're cracking down on places that teach religion.
right.
Most specifically, it affects the Uyghurs, which are the people that live in Western China,
Right.
who are Muslim, and so
Right.
I believe most likely going to affect the Muslims of that area.
Yeah.
The reason that it was probably put into place.
Right.
And yeah, that's all about. I pretty much skimmed it. It just kind of seemed like an interesting
Yeah.
topic.
I think that's interesting. The situation in China in Xinjiang, which is the province where the Uyghur people live.
Yeah,
You have it's kind of a conversation that can be had in various places in the world. You have religious minorities in certain areas that think that they should have separate rights or a separate legal system based on their religion. I don't usually I don't really agree with that. You know what I mean?
yeah.
I'm not really with that.
So yeah. If anybody else had any questions, anybody that's watching, we'll take a question. I don't know if anybody's still watching that wants to have a question answered.
Yeah, or something
Something
else
sounds
that
like
they
it's
want
going
to
on
have
in my
discussed that they think
house.
is important, or trending issue, something that they think is important going on in the world. You know?
If nobody has any questions, I think we're gonna take a short little break, and I'll start up the live feed again whenever we're back.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Just that's not it.
Cool.